Welcome to the On List. So today on the On List, we're going to talk about two houses that are seemingly distinct from one another, but in reality, they are actually two sides of the same coin. In this case, those two houses are going to be Montale and Mancera. So for those of you who know about these two houses, this is probably just going to be a refresher. You might learn a couple things that you didn't know before. I don't know your depth of knowledge, I can't assume. But for those of you who've heard the names Montale and Mancera and don't really know what they're about, this quick little video will give you enough you need to start exploring. So let's get going. Montale and Mancera are two sides of the same coin, primarily because they are both owned by the same person. That person is a gentleman named Pierre Montale, after which the first of those two houses is actually named, clearly. And the thing about Pierre Montale is his story is one of those semi-magical sounding ones, so I don't know how true it actually is. Those of you who really want to do some deep Google dives can get that information for me and then relay it back to me in comments if you want. But what I was able to dig up very quickly is that he came down from France to the Middle East, and supposedly he served as a court perfumer for Saudi royalty. Now, this might sound like some magical tales mumbo jumbo, but you know, in that part of the world where countries are still ruled by exorbitantly wealthy royal families, you know, it's not a far stretch of the imagination to envision them still having things like courtesans and court-appointed this and royal private that. I mean, the British ruling family have their own cooks and doctors and everything else. They probably don't have their own in-house perfumer that makes fragrances just for Buckingham, but, you know, the Middle East hits a little different, right? You know, they do things in a very old way sometimes. You know, just look at the way they still package perfumes in that part of the world. They still use very ornate, thick glass bottles with bejeweled caps, heavy brass usually, sometimes gold even. You know, so they still do things in a way that projects that the perfumes are for, you know, for the haves, not for the have-nots. The perfumes are for the royals. Even their more affordable brands try to emulate that royal style. I mean, you see bottles from Lattafa and Versace, Armaf, Al Haramain, Asghari. They're still very thick, heavy, wrapped in faux leather with metal buckles. You know, you get the point, right? So that old world way of doing things is still very much alive in the Middle East. So I wouldn't put it past that part of Pierre Montale's story being true. He may have gone down because he was paid an awful lot of money to do so and was a private royal court perfumer for the Saudi ruling family. Either way, we do know that eventually he was given a monetary backing by someone down there to start his own house in Dubai. So chances are, if he did work for this Saudi royal family making perfumes, he probably took his experience with that and whatever money they threw at him and used it to launch Montale in 2003. So again, that part is a little magical sounding, but what we do know, the facts are, 2003 is when Montale came into existence, and it was based out of Dubai. And of course, you know about Dubai, and if you don't know about Dubai, well, Dubai is kind of like the Las Vegas of the Middle East. It's where all of the rich playboys go from that part of the world. So yeah, you get a lot of oil magnates going there. A lot of royal family members go there. They get a lot of Western tourism too, because again, it's like Las Vegas. So it's where all the nightlife lives. And a lot of money gets dumped into Dubai too. In recent years, they've taken a couple hits. They took a pretty bad hit during the 2000s financial recession, late 2000s. And then when the pandemic hit, they took another massive dive. So Dubai has been knocked down a couple pegs since it was first, you know, crowned as the Las Vegas of the Middle East, but it's still very much a place where you spend a bunch of money. And that's exactly the kind of place that Pierre Montale would want to put, you know, a Middle Eastern themed perfume operation that uses effectively Western techniques. You see, that's the thing with Montale, is Montale kind of does the same thing that Amouage does, where they take Middle Eastern aesthetics and materials, oud, sandalwood, frankincense, heavy rose, amber, very breathy, salty ambergris, not the clean ambrox and stuff we're used to, but like the real ambergris or a facsimile of real ambergris that has those animalic elements. They like the stankadank down there, okay? They like the musk. They like that virile, barnyardy stuff. That's what they like. And of course, they're out there in 120-degree heat where they have to wear robes to keep their skins from burning. So it makes sense. They need a perfume that's very heavy. You can't be going out in the middle of a desert wearing Dolce & Gabbana. It's just not going to work, guys. Your skin's going to either eat it or it's just going to evaporate off. So they need heavy perfumes, very rich in oil. And a lot of the perfumes there are not even alcohol-based, right? They are atars, they are macalats, they are based in oil. And that's because of the weather. It's just fragrance adapting to the needs of the environment of the society, right? So Montale kind of banks on that a little bit. They are still Western fragrances. They are still based in alcohol. They are somewhat more oily feeling, though, compared to a French fragrance from Dior or something like that, or Estee Lauder from America, Tom Ford. So when you spray a Montale, it's going to feel like you're actually spraying a parfum or something, even if it says eau de parfum on the package. It's a very oily fragrance, and that's because those fragrances were originally released for people in Dubai to wear, right? So as the story goes, it's kind of a similar situation to Amouage, where it's East meets West. The only difference is Montale never really had aspirations originally to send his perfumes across the world, whereas Amouage from day one was trying to get their products in French boutiques too, and eventually America. They weren't just going to stick in Oman, right? They were going to try and be everywhere. Montale didn't have those aspirations at first. They tried to stay more or less to Dubai and tried to do what I'm going to jokingly refer to as like reverse Orientalism. And Orientalism is a touchy subject in perfumery. It's basically when Western houses take ingredients from Southeast Asia or the Middle East and drop them into a thoroughly Western fragrance and then call it Oriental. So this goes back 100 years. Okay, this goes back to Shalimar in 25. Okay, this goes back to Taboo from Dana in the 30s. So Western brands have done this this Orientalism thing for a long time, where we take a mostly Western fragrance and put a little something exotic in there so we can justify that it's Oriental or whatever. And the word Oriental is somewhat problematic too, because of it's got pejorative and it's got racial slur connotations in it as well. But that's off topic here. Point is, the reverse Orientalism that Montale kind of gives you, it's them taking thoroughly Middle Eastern concepts, rose, oud fragrances, incense fragrances, heavy patchoulis, heavy floral musks, things like that, and just delivering them to you in a Western way. So they are spray perfumes based in alcohol. He even dispensed with the usual Middle Eastern packaging, so you're not going to get heavy glass, you're not going to get gold-plated anything or brass. You're not going to get crystals adorned on the cap or on the bottle. These aren't going to feel like paperweights. In fact, Montale went pretty much the opposite direction. Lightweight metal tin cans that have the name of the fragrance stamped right on the front like a sticker. Not even a cap, okay? Screw-on atomizer. Screws right on. You can't really get it off, though. It's like perma-screwed on, but screwed-on atomizer with a little clip that you put on underneath the neck, and it keeps the head from coming down so you can carry it around without spraying. Originally, when Montale fragrances launched, they actually had a little leather sleeve that went over the can, make it a little bit fancier, but they don't do this anymore. Now it's just you get the can and that's it, and like a little burlap sack or something, a little velveteen, drawstring kind of deal, like a bottle of Crown Royal or something. The actual smell of the fragrances are going to be that similar Amouage, East meets West. Lower price point though, so don't expect that same level of refinement. And also expect a lot of really loud, gregarious, extroverted fragrances, because Montale is playing the tourism, right? And when you're out partying until 3 a.m. in Dubai, you want to smell loud. You want to smell like what you are, right? So these are really big, bold rose and synthetic oud. Sometimes it's more medicinal oud. Sometimes it's more barnyardy. Sometimes it's smokier. There's different flavors of the oud, and he touches on all of them. So if you want the stanky ones, he's got those. If you want the more bitter ones, he's got those too. The rubbery ones, the smoky ones. A lot of rose, though. So if you don't like rose, you don't want to mess with Montale. You get a lot of rose, you get a lot of oud. They might feel redundant because, again, rose, oud, amber, incense, very common materials in Middle Eastern fragrances. To a nose from that part of the world, it's not actually redundant. They can tell the subtle differences between this rose versus that rose, because to them, rose fragrances are about as common as like aquatics are here. We can tell one aquatic from another. We can tell cool water from Kenzo, from light blue, from polo blue, right? We can tell one aquatic from another. So they can tell this rose oud from that rose oud. You and I, maybe not so much, unless you immerse yourself fully in the brand. So a lot of Western noses complain about the redundancy of the rose oud options. But I mean, it is what it is, man. These weren't made for you, okay? Let me just make that clear. These fragrances were not initially made for you unless you are from that part of the world. Once the Montales started getting more popular and they began to get exported, they started hitting France, they started hitting the United States, UK, Australia, then Montale began to make more Western style fragrances. We started seeing Fougères Marine, we started seeing Greyland, we started seeing Red Vetiver, we started seeing Sandflowers, etc., etc. Even then, when they're trying to be more overtly Western, they still put a little Middle Eastern twist in there. Sandflowers is an aquatic with a heavy rose element and a salty ambergris element, okay? Fougères Marine, same thing. It's got some callbacks to Middle Eastern perfumery. They don't have anything that's just straight up going to smell like Chanel. They just don't. They're not going to touch that, okay? Now let's get on to Mancera. Little less to talk about with Mancera. They are the flip side to the coin, granted, but they are also the flip side to the coin because they are Pierre Montale's reaction to Western acceptance of the Montale fragrances. He decided, I guess, to make a brand, and he actually co-founded the brand with his daughter. And I don't remember her name, maybe it's Melanie, but he has a daughter, and the two of them kind of pulled together and created Mancera. And those fragrances are more French in style. They come in glass bottles. They still have some Middle Eastern elements. I mean, they have a heavy metal cap, okay? The earlier ones had a screw-on atomizer with a screw-on cap, like the Montale bottles, and the later ones have the magnetic cap, but they're still made of metal, still heavy, still feels substantial. It's just the virtue of having a glass bottle, period, makes it more Western presentation-wise. And of course, the smell of Manceras are also a little more Western. You're going to get a little more clean fragrances. You're going to get things that are more candied floral nature. You're going to get things that are going to feel a little more like a blue fragrance, a little more like a fruit chouly for women, a little more like a Western style oud, which doesn't really bank as heavy on musk or floral notes. There's going to be more of that peppery, woody kind of M7-ish quality. You're going to have more tonka bombs. You're going to have a lot more of just what you'd expect from a French niche brand when you're dealing with Mancera. So again, it's the flip side of the coin. You can almost look at it like a slider. If the Middle East is on one side of the slider and Europe is on the other side of the slider, the Montale is slid more towards the Middle East and the Mancera is slid more towards the West. But both of them are a mixture of concepts. Both of them are hybrid. There is no straight Middle East, straight Europe. That's not how either of these brands roll. And this is also another reason why they do feel like two sides of the same coin. And the concepts tend to overlap. They even use overlapping nomenclature. I'll give you an example of that. There's a chocolate greedy for Montale and a roses greedy for Mancera. There is a red tobacco for Mancera and a red vetiver for Montale. So very clearly, they sort of borrow from each other. or it's one big pool, really, one big pile of fragrances in progress, of mods, I guess, of briefs, one big R&D department that then takes the fragrance and goes, okay, this one goes to Montale, this one goes to Mancera. Another thing is Pierre Montale lays claim to being the perfumer for all the fragrances. At least he did initially. These days, I don't know. And it's been speculated that he does more of a Raja Dove kind of situation, or like what the guy who runs DS and Durga does, where he just kind of creates a rough concept with a perfume organ, bashes something together, and it goes, I want something like this, and it sends it off, and then lets an actual lab technician perfumer finesse it up into a finished product. I don't know. He could be actually in the trenches himself doing it all. Can't say that for sure. Not there. Again, not a fly on the wall. But those rumors come up. And that's basically it. Montale and Mancera. It's Middle Eastern fragrance by way of Western execution. And yeah, there are a lot of redundant oud options. There are a lot of redundant rose options. You might even find some of the Montales smelling almost like flankers to Mancera and vice versa. Like, one of the most popular Montale fragrances is actually Black Oud. And there is a Mancera fragrance very similar to it called Black Gold. And you smell them both and you're like, right? And that's just the way it is. Mancera does have a lot less fragrances. And they also tend to be priced higher in discounters. Retail-wise, they're both the same. But the Montales, being there's more of them, and being there's a lot of them that are not really looked upon fondly by Western noses. Again, Montales are very popular in the Middle East, but a lot of them don't really fly with Western noses. So when Western retailers get some of these more Middle Eastern style Montales, they don't sell. So they go into discounters. So if you're looking for a really good value with niche fragrances, particularly you want a good value niche brand, and then you combine these two together, you like a really good value niche brand and you like Middle Eastern fragrances in general, then Montale will be a playground for you. A literal playground, because some of these are $50, $70, and you can have all the rose and oud and patchouli and frankincense and ambergris and muskiness to your heart's desire. You can just go nuts, okay, with Montale. Some of them cost a little more if they're newer or if they were limited releases, but most of them are going to be in designer territory price-wise. Mancera's a little more Western taste, and they make less fragrances. They're a little harder to come by in discounters, and therefore discounters will have them for higher prices. That doesn't mean they're going to be crazy expensive, but you might be paying close to $100 for some of them. And the other thing is, Mancera has the real big one, which is Cedrat Bois. Cedrat Bois came out in 2011, and even though to me it doesn't smell like Creed Aventus, it was compared back in the day very heavily to Creed Aventus, so it had a lot of hype behind it. And because Cedrat Bois had a lot of hype, Mancera secondhand got that hype, and I feel like that post-Creed hype is still affecting the prices and the perception of Mancera. A lot of your frag bros, a lot of your compliment-getting Lotharios are still like, yeah, Mancera, man, bro, like that. And they're just like, and I'm just going like this, like, no, please, shut up, I don't care. But we have to acknowledge that, okay? That will affect your experience, unfortunately. Will affect your experience testing Manceras. Montale, not so much. Montale is kind of for the nerds, okay? So when you go digging into that, you're not going to come into that element. But you go digging into Mancera, you definitely will. And there you have it. That's Montale and Mancera, two sides of the same coin. If you like rose, you like oud, you like niche fragrances that don't break the bank, then these two sides of the same very smelly coin may appeal to you. And that has been the Unlist.